Hi, I'm Mark Honeybone from Property Ventures, and welcome to our weekly podcast where we interview prominent members of the investment community along with other professionals in the New Zealand property market. This is a free service from Property Ventures so that you can keep current and learn from some of the best around New Zealand. To check us out, take a look at propertyventures.co.nz. We hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hi all and welcome back to another podcast. Yep, we've had a bit of a break, but we're back and we have a pretty important subject to talk about today. Meth has become a major problem throughout many industries in New Zealand. It affects families, police, health of people living in these places, and of course investors and property investors. So what we've done today is we've got Miles along from Meth Solutions, and we're going to touch on everything we can to do with meth, testing, signs, and what we can actually do to fix it up. Do you just walk away, or do you make a dollar from actually doing it, and what the risks might be by doing that? So I hope you enjoy today's podcast and you get quite a bit out of it. So welcome to the show, Miles.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me along, Mark.
No worries. So listeners know who you are. Tell us just a wee bit about yourself and what you did before you got involved with meth.
Before I got involved with meth, yeah, it's on the right side of the equation. So my professional background has all been around insurance and risk. Before I came to New Zealand in 1997, did a bit of that work over here, and then after that, it's really been business development focused work, but always with a cause. So I spent a lot of time trying to get rubbish out of landfills, and then back in 2010. A mate of mine had developed this product, MethMinder, that some of the people that are listening would have heard of. He needed somebody with a business development background at the same time as I was looking for something different to do.
Yep.
And the two things came together, and 6 years later, here we are.
Jolly good. Okay. So, meth, why all the fuss?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I know that a lot of investors wonder the same thing. Look, principally, it's a health and safety issue. Okay, if it's short term, limited effect, longer term, there's more significant health risks. Greater risk of cancer and heart disease and stroke and nervous system disorders. And people say, well, look, sure, if it's that bad, the guys who are making the stuff would be dying.
Yeah,
the reality is that they are.
Yeah.
Okay, but they don't turn up to A&E, and on the bit where it says occupation, I'm a meth cook. Right? So essentially, you've got lots of people who are dying of heart attack and stroke in their 40s and 50s, young ages, who've got an historic meth habit. And the risk, therefore, for occupants of the property is that they're exposed to the same chemicals that are associated with that part of the process. So the real fuss is driven by a health and safety issue. After that, as some people will be aware, the costs associated with fixing it up are pretty dire. So it's about trying to minimise the harm there, and that's the purpose of Meth Solution, is to reduce the harm that this stuff causes the property. But the bit that is often underestimated is the emotional harm.
Yeah.
We deal with lots of people who've been taken advantage of, and there's nothing pleasant about it at all.
No, I totally imagine. Okay, so obviously it's in the news a lot these days, or what have you.
Yep.
When also did it really come of age in New Zealand, if it's the right sort of terminology?
Yep.
How long has it sort of been, and how long has testing been going on for?
So, there's nothing new about meth in property, right? As long as meth has been used and manufactured in New Zealand, which is around about 15 or so years, properties have become contaminated with methamphetamine.
Yep.
There have been testing services. They more came along in sort of the mid 2000s. There were a few more of those that were going on.
Yep.
In terms of sort of coming in age and becoming an accepted part of the, let's say, the due diligence process, and increasingly a part of how people choose to manage property. Realistically, it's only in the back end of last year and this year that the penny's finally dropped,
Yep.
and enough awareness have landed. So you've kind of passed that tipping point where people have said, well, it's just a fuss over nothing. Let's make it sure it goes away. Well, it hasn't, and it won't, won't because of that health and safety risk that I talked about.
Yeah. And it's we'll talk afterwards about it's not easy to pick up what sort of house will have meth also.
Correct.
So we'll sort of get that into it as we go through.
Yeah.
So meth testing. So what is it actually? What is it you're doing? Obviously, you're trying to find out has the house got meth in it, or been smoked, or made, or whatever. So what is it though? What is meth testing?
So I guess not every meth test is created equal. Right? So often meth testing is looking for methamphetamine residues within the property. And, some of you people listening will be familiar with the instant answer kits, the ones that give you an answer there and then.
Yeah.
We don't use them. There's some reasons around that we can talk about. But they and lab-based testing kits are looking for methamphetamine.
Yeah.
So methamphetamine can get into a property either from use or manufacture.
Yep.
The principal thing that you're trying to rule out is the manufacture side of things.
Yep.
But use can be problematic, and particularly at the moment with a lot of heat in the emotive part of the discussion, as it were. A lot of people are uncertain around what meth involves, and so the emotional response to a little bit of meth from use is often very similar to the emotional responses associated with manufacture.
Yeah.
So what methamphetamine is, I guess, is an indicator of the sort of behaviour that's gone on. So the bigger the number, the greater the likelihood that meth manufacture's occurred, and therefore the more problems, and therefore the more challenging it is to sort out.
Is there a certain number when you do your test where you can go, right, I know it's been made, it's been manufactured in the house? Or is there
No, there's not a particular number.
Yeah.
Right?
But
So
you can generally tell from...
yeah, so what we look at, again, if you're using an instant answer kit, if you pick it up, and there's a big if that can be associated with that side of things, but if you pick it up, you get a positive or a negative, so you get no sense as to the sort of behaviour that's gone on. So again, one of the advantages that we have with using lab-based testing is that we do get a number, and we also get in the reports that we receive from the laboratory stuff around pseudoephedrine or levels of around pseudoephedrine and ephedrine, which can be key indicators of risk around manufacture, and then also amphetamine, which again is another sort of precursor around the methamphetamine side of things. So we get a lot more information, which when you sit it along the thousands of jobs that we've done over the last 4 years, allows us to create a greater sense of, okay, well, this is a lot likely to be the sort of thing that's gone on.
Yeah.
But you can have low levels of meth in a property,
Yeah.
okay, which would be typically indicative of of use. But then sitting alongside that, you've got the presence of potentially higher levels of ephedrine and pseudoephedrine.
Right.
So now one of the ways in which a meth user gets their hands on the drug
Yeah.
is to allow the mobile lab to turn up.
Okay.
So you can have what would look to be a comparatively low level, but all of the other indicators of risk that suggest that maybe manufactures occurred.
Right.
It's not a precise science in determining what's happened.
Yeah.
You've got indications of risk.
Yeah. And what does the meth test do? You have a swab, and you get a swab and go in different parts of the house, or was it you must know you have the same place every kitchen you go into, or every big bedroom you go into?
Yeah, so we try not to go into too much detail
Yeah.
around the specific sites that we would
yeah.
we would take samples
Yeah,
from.
true. Okay,
Simply because you don't want to encourage behaviours of people who are trying to mask a more significant underlying issue. But again, how you would sample a property would really depend on the question that you're asking. Okay,
Yeah.
and how much information that you want to get, because you can get a lab-based meth test for a couple of $100,
Yeah.
or you can spend a couple of thousand.
Yeah.
All right, so it's the same lab-based testing,
Yeah.
but the way in which the sampling gets done and the question that you're trying to answer is fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And similarly, if you're using the instant answer kits that you can source off the internet, how you would use those would depend on the answer that you're trying to get. So, what Meth Solutions offers is a range of services directly and also through associated businesses. If the question you're asking, look, is a property meth clean? So essentially, is there any meth in a property? You would use an individual kit to sample up to 8 areas.
Yeah.
So the whole idea there being is you're not trying to determine in strict accordance with these Ministry of Health guidelines, and I know we'll talk about those in a little while, as to what the levels are and is it above guidelines, is it safe? The classic questions that people are looking for. You simply aren't trying to answer, look, is it there? And if it isn't there, because of how you do the sampling, high-risk areas, and try and get a sample out of every room, you can have a really high level of confidence that if there is any meth in there at all, it's only going to be a little bit, it's not going to be problematic from a health and safety side of things. It's cost you $200 to get that answer.
Yeah, that's right. Hence the reason they've got the health and safety, you've got their guidelines or whatever their figure is that makes it healthy to live in there. Or hopefully zero in there.
Yeah, look, in an ideal world, it's zero, right?
Yeah.
So what we've got is some currently acceptable guideline levels. So what many people would have heard of is this figure of 0.5 micrograms, right?
Yeah.
But it's not just a number, right? It's a number relative to an area of a 10 by 10 centimetre squared.
Okay.
So, for example, with the instant answer kits that you can get off the internet for a few bucks,
Yeah.
many of those will trigger when you've collected 0.5 micrograms of methamphetamine or above.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you haven't sampled an area of 10 by 10 centimetres squared,
Yeah.
then you're potentially, you've got a situation, you might have covered 10% of the area, you get a negative, you think everything's fine,
Right.
but actually there's 3, 4, 5 micrograms of methamphetamine in that area. So while on the one level they're technically capable often of indicating positive when 0.5 micrograms has been collected, if the sampling has been less good, all right, you haven't covered the area, or you're not picking 100% up of what's on the surface, and you never get 100% of what's on the surface, you can get a false sense of security that's associated with a negative result. Right? So by using a laboratory, we can test down to much lower levels. And for the owner of an investment property, all right, so if they want to do a baseline meth test through the sale and purchase process, they've got a high level of confidence that they're buying property that doesn't have the issue. You then got the baseline that you can repeat in between tenancies.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good. Great stuff.
There we go.
All good.
But if you want to know the full detail, if you want to know relative to the Ministry of Health guidelines, you've got to use individual kits in individual areas. You're looking at anywhere from $1,200 to $2,500.
Right. Great stuff. Okay. So obviously, meth's only in place in only probably in Auckland. It's such a badass town. What's the rest of people? I won't go anywhere, but people will listen to this and be naming a few places right now.
Yeah.
that I'm probably thinking about too. I come over this beloved, beautiful place down in Blenheim, and I believe you go, geez, wouldn't be meth there, but I think you guys did a test there. Probably done more than that since a few years ago. So, is it a problem throughout the whole country, and do you get involved with that?
Yes, it is a problem throughout the whole country, and of course I would say that. But then, we've tested properties that have had labs operating them from Invercargill through to Kaitaia.
Yeah.
And I've got no hesitation in saying that that they've had labs operating them based on the numbers that we're seeing.
Right.
What we set out to do with Meth Solutions was to make affordable lab-based testing available to people right around the country, where you didn't get leverage because you happen to live in a region. Right? Yes. So the geographic dispersion of New Zealand is inevitably means that there are times when people are going to have to pay travel, and I think that people in more remote areas are used to that.
Yeah.
But what I didn't want to have is people consider you prejudiced because they happen to live in Blenheim. So that was what the model was designed to do. Yeah, is it a problem all around the country? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Of the properties that we sampled, 40% of them have got meth in.
Yeah.
We've now sampled over 6,500 properties.
Yeah, so 40%.
40% have got meth in. Now that doesn't mean to say that 40% of them have got health and safety. No.
Exactly.
So it doesn't mean that 40% of homes in New Zealand have got meth in, right? It doesn't mean that all of those properties have got levels of meth in them that is problematic from a health and safety side of things. Nevertheless, it's an indication of how widespread meth use is, and wherever you've got meth use, you've got a higher risk of manufacture taking place within the property.
Yeah.
Okay. So South Island as a whole is about 1 in 3 of the properties that we tested down there has had meth in.
Yeah.
Coromandel is 1 in 2. Auckland, 40%, 43%. In fact, in West Auckland, 1 in 2, pretty much that we do.
Right.
So there are sort of peaks and troughs and lumps and bumps. But the efforts of the police. Focusing on some of the communities around Auckland have pushed people more out to rural areas. Methamphetamine follows the cash, and if you think about where the money's been up until the last couple of years, a lot of it's been in dairy.
True.
Okay, so we've done a lot of work with farmers. So owners of farms, for example, have got obligations around workplace health and safety now. Right? So the test for them is typically a little bit higher than it is for your standard owner of a residential property, but again through the rural communities about 40%. And now that things are tightening up in the rural sector, I can see a big issue coming for farm owners and operators around that sort of thing. So unfortunately, methamphetamine, it's that nightmare gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know, I ask you how you think the police sort of control it. I mean, they seem to do these big drug busts, and they seem to they're obviously onto it, and they know where it is and what they're trying to achieve, sort of thing. Do you think overall they are, as you said, it keeps moving?
Yeah.
But overall, you think they are doing a reasonable job of trying to?
I think the police do the best they possibly can with the resources that they have available.
Yeah.
But the resources that they have available are very limited, and the evidence that you need in order to get a conviction around manufacture is incredibly high. So there's we've been into multiple properties where the view is it's been use, but actually the levels of meth residues when you actually get the test results back are indicative of at least some level of manufacture going on. I mean, in order to afford a meth habit, so 0.1 of a gram of methamphetamine is about $100.
Yeah.
So you've either got to have a really high-paying job, and there are many meth users who do have high-paying jobs and are high-functioning. There's examples of them being caught in the media from time to time. You've either got to deal, you've got to steal, you have to prostitute yourself, you have to make it, or you allow the property that you rent to have meth made in it.
Yeah.
And because of that ability for these things to move around, again, we see hotels and motels getting busted. You hear about holiday homes getting done, bloody camper vans. Because of that mobility, it's incredibly hard for the boys in blue to get the evidence that they need to get a conviction around manufacture. Where they are getting convictions, and you mentioned Blenheim, for example, they've seen a 4 to 5-fold increase in the number of people who are being arrested for possession with intent to supply.
Yeah.
So when you've got that increased number of people out there in the community, it just simply means that demand for the product is going up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, not a good situation out there, that's for sure. I mean, you talked about the 40% of the tests you do come positive, which is not a good positive.
Well, you come back with some level of method.
Some level of method, and obviously, as some people will do it by default. We'll get a meth test done, which is great. But the reason it's higher level because some people will have suspicions, I guess, and that's why they come to someone like you to go and do a test. So when you walk in a house, can you sometimes you have no idea, I guess, generally can you walk in and go, I know the manufacturing of this, or you can do anything and go, I think it has got telltale signs of maybe people using.
So this is a really challenging thing, Mark, is that if it's just use-related stuff, for example, you can't smell it. If there's no materials that have been left lying around, you're not already going to see anything that's going on. So often the indicators of risk there are behavioural, on the part of the tenant. There might be reports from neighbours of comings and goings, and maybe there's incandescent light bulbs and there's not quite as many in the roof as there used to be. Around the whole manufacture side of things, there can be some odour depending on the process that's gone on. The challenge that everybody's got is that we're constrained by the law. Right? And most of us will follow the law to a reasonable extent. And the Residential Tenancies Act says you've got to give 48 hours notice to access a property. Well, that's enough time to get a skip in, get everything gone, and get the cleaners through.
Right.
Okay, so effectively, law-abiding citizens have got one arm tied behind the back. And look, there are some good reasons that are associated with that. They're quite enjoyment and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, that's a constraint as far as the system is concerned. Some of the stuff that we talk to people about as far as getting their meth radar on is, have security cameras been installed? Why is that? Is there signs of smoking inside the property, but then cigarette butts outside the property a little bit of a distance away? Right? From time to time, the atmosphere gets quite inflammable, and there can be explosions, which is what makes good pictures for the TV. If you're doing inspections, check out try and time your inspection around rubbish collection day. Flip the lid on the recycling bin, have a look in there. Are there, is there chemical packaging? Are there, packaging of drugs? We've seen, properties that we've gone into where there's, I guess people who don't look like they look after themselves that well have got 10-litre flagons of pure dew distilled water from the supermarket. Legitimate reasons why that has, but there's a disconnect between very pure drinking water, which can be used in the meth manufacture process, and the way in which people are choosing to look after themselves. Again, if you're getting access denied to certain rooms, you've got to have a policy for getting in them. If they're potentially you've got chemicals that are unusual, you've got hot plates in areas where you wouldn't normally expect them to be, you might have coffee filters, but no coffee machine. There's a whole bunch of little bits and pieces that when you pull it together, and there's information on the police websites around that, there's information on the Meth Solutions website around that, but when you put it together, you've got this view of enhanced risk. Doesn't mean to say that it's happened, but that's where the testing comes in. And there's many, many instances where the only way in which the boys in blue, who've got lots more training than any of us do, the only way that they know that manufacture or significant meth-related behaviour has occurred is by having some testing done.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not one of those things you can immediately know what it is, sort of thing.
And
It's behaviour will be half the...
Behavioural is a big thing. So, for a landlord who might have a tenant who's been okay, but then has become problematic, got behavioural issues going on, might be damage to the property that comes in. You've got reports of arguments and potentially the comings and goings that the neighbours are talking about. That's an indicator of risk. So one of the challenges for the investors is, or landlording 101, is that you've got to minimise your downtime, right, and increase your occupancy, right. So historically, what basically happens is you've got the nightmare tenant who's done a runner on you, been a pain in the backside for the last however many weeks, probably owes you a bit of cash and has left damage in the property. Christ, I've got to get that back on the market. Get the bog out, fill up the holes, put some paint on the walls, rent it out again. That coat of paint has cost you a few $1,000 when it comes to the whole clean-up process. Because it's just not part of most people's existence, and we don't think about it.
That did, right. Okay, so so that on that point, why would you get a meth test done on a property? What's the sort of the different reasons that you might do it?
So, I guess your motivation is a little bit different depending on what stage of the transaction that you're at. So, if you own the property, I think the instinctive reaction that most of us had is, Christ, I don't want to know. All right. And you can understand it, but one of the reasons why you need to think about doing, I believe, is that the window of opportunity that's associated with getting somebody else to pay for at least some of it is reducing. So if you look at what the insurance companies are doing, they are increasingly capping cover. They are making it more challenging, to get a claim admitted. So they will start, whereas before they were saying, show us your inspection reports. And the challenge for most private landlords, not the professional investor, but for most private landlords, is they get somebody in, Miles, he seems like a good bugger, I'll just leave him to it. They've got no insurance cover. Right. It's just fact and reality. So what the insurance companies are now doing in some instances is saying, where's the vetting that you did? Where's the credit checks? So we're starting to see the bar is being set higher and higher in terms of what a prudent uninsured should have been doing, which is the test as far as getting an insurance claim to pay out. So that's only going to get more challenging. And if the problem exists in your property, the problem exists in your property, right? The timing of a meth test doesn't fundamentally make any difference. We've now got, it's always been a health and safety requirement, we've now got the uncertainty that's associated with this workplace health and safety legislation. What does that mean? Uncertain for the residential landlord, very much more clear for the commercial landlords, and they need to be conscious and aware of that. So it's kind of like, if you've done an assessment of risk, if you really don't think it's that bad, grasp the nettle. Good old English expression, but basically the old nettles, they will sting you, but if you get hold of them quickly, if they do sting, they don't tend to hurt quite as bad, The window of opportunity is there, give it a go. If you think you've got an issue, putting people into that property is only going to make it worse. Right? So what we're starting to see again from the Tenancy Tribunal is judgments that are coming out, which are basically saying, well, appreciate that you didn't know, Mark, but actually that doesn't matter anymore. The whole intent, and that was Section 109, that basically said you had to intend to put people into a position of risk. Now you're starting to see judgments coming through that push that off to one side. So the pressure on the owner of the investment property is increasing in terms of the risk management. Now, if you don't think you've got an issue, the other reason why that you should be doing it is that same property can get you in the Auckland market, for example, $30 to $40 a week extra, because you can create surety and peace of mind to the people looking to rent that property that doesn't have the meth problem. And that's not Miles Stratford talking out the back of my head. That's a professional investor phoning me up and telling me how great the whole meth management program is.
No, I've just been talking about that recently, and so you've got to. It just depends on where you are in Auckland, I guess, or it shouldn't even depend on where you are in Auckland. But if you can have a house and you've got a certification to say that it's a meth-free house, you will, and you should get more money for it.
It doesn't matter where you are. Again, I'm not sure how many people have turned up to view properties at the moment, but in Auckland, there's some reasonable numbers. And so essentially, you imagine 5 properties exactly the same, and this one doesn't have the meth problem. Which is the one that everybody wants to rent.
Right.
Okay, and what do the law of supply and demand say about that? And if it only means you get the best quality tenant in there, then you're going to improve your overall return on investment on your asset, because they're going to look after the place better. They're going to stay for longer. They're going to be easier to manage. Your R&M costs are going to come down. So it's not just about management of risk, okay? It is about taking advantage of opportunity. And if you're looking at it then in terms of, okay, well, now I'm looking at property to buy, and again, a lot of the people listening to this, I would imagine, would have got a due diligence process that they developed some years ago. Okay, that probably doesn't include getting a meth test done, but it should do, right? Because why do people invest in property? They want to make money, and you spend $200 to $300 through the sale and purchase process and getting a meth test done. The worst return on investment is that scenario we just described. You've got the meth-free property that you can market as being the meth-free property. The next best return on investment is there's a little bit of meth in there. So now you're making sure that you're not buying a significant problem, okay, and that you're paying the right price. And then the other scenario is there's a load of meth in there, and we deal with this all the time, and sometimes with some what I would describe as very savvy investors. Again, it's not part of their due diligence process, and they buy themselves a big problem where they paid market rate for something that comes with a $30,000 to $50,000 cleanup bill, no insurance, and they've got to declare it going forward.
And just on the insurance thing, it's something actually I don't know too much about with the meth. I think two questions. First question will be, is the situation you said before where you've owned your property, you may have proven it was meth free at some time, and then you get a test done for whatever reason. You said tenant goes a bit nasty or whatever, and you find you've got a meth in there. You have to have a special thing on a special insurance as part of your normal house insurance to get insurance to get that. The process fixed. Say for example, it was $10,000 to fix it up. What does insurance do?
So it's a classic. It depends. And again, everybody listening to this should be going out and checking their policies of insurance. Okay. True. So some of the things that they should be looking for are exclusions for contamination from hazardous and illegal substances. All right. So that's a bunch of insurance-based weasel words that are specifically designed to rule out meth contamination. Okay. Some of the other policies, so for example, AMI will provide cover under their, I don't know the particular wording of the policy that they've got, but let's call it in broad terms the landlord-specific policy. But that will cover for storage, supply, and manufacture. It doesn't cover use-related scenarios. Companies like Vero and Tower do have coverage for use, and I have got a lot of policies that have got coverage for use as well, often capped at $25,000. Companies like FMG at the moment, no cover at all. Right, so for people out in the rural sector, that's a massive gap as far as that side of things is concerned. There are a few policies. So Crombie Lockwood have got a monument insurance policy where if you meth manage the property, so meth miner on the ceiling and do the baseline meth testing, you get full replacement. So there's a very broad range, and you do get what you pay for. If people are looking for a more standard policy, often sourcing through the banks can be a good thing, because while you may have the same underwriter, what you've got now is not just your relationship with the underwriter and all the challenges that can be associated with getting a claim paid. You've got the bank and their leverage in terms of getting things moved along. So, the one property that we've been involved with that got demolished, which is your absolute worst case scenario, that was insured through, with a particular underwriter, but through the bank. Now, that particular underwriter had a solid reputation for only paying out $25,000. Okay, but they paid out $360,000 on this property, because literally the whole thing was knocked over and started against stuff. So getting into the nitty gritty of your insurance is really, really important. But recognising that as a minimum, you'll be asked to typically be asked to look for what your inspection regime is and having copies of written reports. Like I say, most private investors have got no insurance. Because even if it's in the policy wording, they haven't got that level of information that allows them to benchmark it.
Well, the second question with the insurance was, so if you buy a house and you don't get the meth test done, and then later on you need to do an insurance claim because there's meth in there for whatever, is it instant no because you never got it checked?
It's a function of function of time.
It's a proof thing, or
so there's a little bit of a function of time. So again, this is where if you've just bought it and then the neighbours pop round. So we've got a scenario with a property in South Auckland. Okay, just been renoed, new carpets. On the face of it, looked great. All right, purchased 20 micrograms of meth So in total, about 40 times over what it should
Right,
be from
yeah,
8
yeah,
samples in the main house, 16 out in a garage area. So you've got a situation there where somebody's bought the problem. Well, no insurance company is going to step in and cover that side of things. We have seen instances where that scenario has occurred. The owner's been able to go back to the vendor. The vendors then access their policy of insurance. But usually you've got to have an agent engaged in that process who recognises that they've got a significant risk exposure, and then they're working hard to mitigate the impact on the new owner.
Right.
But the old caveat emptor kicks in nice and strongly. But as I've had said to me, how can I be aware of something when I'm not even aware of it? And for most people, it's just not on the radar.
Yeah.
Okay? Even people who deal with it all the time. We've had cops who deal with it all the time, buy houses that could have had problems in them. It's only at the last minute they've been saved because somebody said to them, "Did you get the meth tester?"
Wow. That's scary. Very scary. Yeah.
It's the worst case scenario for us because they are the toughest calls to make.
Yeah.
Because it's all on the person who's bought it.
Yeah.
And we've had that with, obviously, investors, but mums and dads, getting the dream home just down the road from the kids' first home buyers. They're probably in the worst position of everybody. Instead of going forward, they've gone a whole hell of a long way back. So the more people who get it on the radar, the better.
Yeah.
And that's where, effectively, the community of investors can help each other out. Just by, you might be chatting to me with a deal, we've got it's in the headlights, it's going to happen, then I just had to mention, did you get the meth test? Oh, damn it, I forgot about that. That's how people stop themselves from falling into the trap that's associated with the emotion of buying a property.
Right. Just on that, so how long we sort of spoken a bit about the process already, but how long does it take to get a meth test done? So how many days due diligence should someone, if they want to get the house meth tested, how long do they need?
So, again, we use lab-based testing because we want to reduce the risk of missing significant levels of meth residues in a property. The absolute quickest that we could turn that around is we sampled the property today, and as long as it got down to the courier, down to Hamilton, by tomorrow morning, we'd have the results out tomorrow afternoon. About sort of 5 o'clock. So you can get it done in a couple of days. There's a bit of stress that's associated with that because the courier down to Hamilton can be a little bit challenging at times. So typically what we'd say to people is, minimum 3 working days to get the results from the meth test. If people are really pushed for time, we've got building inspectors who can do the baseline meth test as part of the building inspection. If they've got a little bit more time, they might want to put the meth test up front because if they've got a zero meth criteria, then they haven't spent lots of money on other things which all stack up. And then we get the meth test done, and then we'd wasted a whole bunch of cash. So again, I think one of the things I recommend to people is that if meth is coming onto your radar, you're thinking about it, determine what your criteria is in terms of what may be acceptable, because a little bit of meth doesn't mean to say that it's not a good investment. But make your mind up around that up front so that it makes it much easier for you working through the results of a positive meth test, because there's a reasonable chance it's going to come back with something in.
Okay, we'll talk soon about the different levels, and some people get scared off when maybe they shouldn't be scared off also, so that's okay, so if the place is positive, so he comes back, and this is obviously going to depend on what the levels are and what you consider, I think. What actions may be needed to fix the issue, and it's a pretty open-ended question. Because it depends on whether the house needs to be destroyed or a bit of cleaning being done.
So I think if we take the process part first. Okay. One of the questions that often people have is, well, do I have to tell anybody? Do I have to tell the council? Do I have to tell the police? No, is the answer to that one. Okay. So getting a meth test done isn't necessarily...
I'll just interrupt you there. If you're a real estate agent, yes, we do have to tell you. So carry on.
So if you are a real estate agent, then yes, you do have to communicate that side of things through to other prospective purchasers. But if you're the owner of the property asset, there's no obligation to notify through to, for example, the territorial authority, the council. Okay, which I know is a lot of concern that people have, and they don't necessarily therefore want to get involved and engaged in the whole meth testing, because I might have to tell somebody. What you've got to basically do is that if there's a reasonable amount of meth in there, so it's indicating that there's a good likelihood that it will go above Ministry of Health guidelines, or you know that it already exceeds the Ministry of Health guidelines, then what we do is try and coach the owner of the problem through the steps that are prescribed by the Ministry of Health guidelines. All right? So the first step is to get the problem quantified.
Yeah.
Okay, so how much, where is it in the property? When you understand that, then you can start to put in place a remediation action plan, which is the things that you just described. How do we fix it?
Yeah.
And how you fix it is going to depend on what's happened, where it is, the type of materials that are involved. Okay, so it really does become how long is a piece of string? As an absolute worst case scenario, like I say, it's happened once in just over 6,500 jobs that we've done.
Yeah.
The property gets knocked over and start again. What most people are looking at is some form of cleaning, and again, there's a number of routes that you would have to take depending on what's happened. So the more meth-related behaviour occurs, and the longer it goes on for, the higher the surface reading.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
The more porous the surface that you're getting that reading from, the more likely it is to have soaked into that particular material.
Yeah.
Okay. And so therefore, if you've got a real high reading and a porous surface, you know that it's going to have gone further into it, and that's where, let's say it's paint over jib, it's into the jib, it's through the jib, it's into the framing. That's when you get to the point where you just say, nah, she's got to go.
Cool.
So that becomes obviously a real challenge for people. There's a little bit we can clean it off the surface. So at very low levels, people can use products like Simple Green, the industrial stuff, or Crystal is a product that they've got.
Yeah.
Lots of elbow grease, triple wash system, which is what a lot of the remediation guys will use.
Yeah.
With a sort of detailed business, the detailed testing business that we do, if it gets above 5 micrograms of methamphetamine on a painted jib surface, our recommendation would be to remove that jib.
Yeah.
Now the reason being, as I say, is that it goes into the jib. You might clean it off the surface. You might stick a coat of paint over the top of it, which I know a lot of people have been tempted to do over time. The risk then is that it comes back out again.
Right.
And similarly, there are an increasing number of sort of wonder sprays around that neutralise methamphetamine. I think they've got a place. The concern that I have around those, and what I think if people are engaging with companies that use that approach, is they need to understand, okay, well, sure, it neutralises the methamphetamine so it won't show up in a meth test, but let's say you've got a risk around manufacture. There's lots of other problematic chemicals that are significant from a health and safety side of things. What does that chemical do to those other problematic substances that have come on the back end of the manufacturing process? Because if it doesn't do anything, you've still got the health and safety risk. You've just neutralised the indicator of risk, which was the methamphetamine.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a balance to be struck, and I know that the temptation is to say, well, look, we'll use this spray, we'll get rid of things because we can neutralise it, we'll pass the meth test and we'll move on. But the principal harm here is health and safety. Okay. So my view is that whatever approach that people are taking to the clean-up and remediation side of things, you've got to have a really good handle on what the long-term health and safety risk is, because you might get it to pass the meth test today.
Yeah.
Super. All right. Then you stick the coat of paint on, but then you go to sell it in 5 years' time, and you find that actually the residues have come back through the paint, and then you go looking for the people who've done the clean-up job. Chances are they won't exist.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So people have got to have a little bit of an eye to the long term.
Yeah. Okay. So that's it could be anything where you get a positive test. It could be a clean. It could be 6 cleans. It could be paint. It could be take the jib off. Do you have seen many where it's actually got into the, rather than just the jib, the framework sort of thing? And
we've seen a handful.
Yeah.
Okay. And there you've got some tough decisions to make around potentially demolition of the property, or scenarios where you're looking at encapsulation. But encapsulation, there's a whole bunch of uncertainty that sits around that.
Yeah.
And what you've got to bear in mind, Mark, is that wherever there's meth present in a property, it creates uncertainty.
Yeah.
In the context of that sale and purchase process, to get that willing buyer, willing seller scenario, you've got to overcome those fundamental uncertainties. And where it's a little bit, it's relatively straightforward to do. Where it's a lot, and it's been well managed, so for example, the jib's been physically removed, well, there is no meth in there because the thing's gone, then you're attending to the uncertainties. But where it's sort of left in situ, there are question marks and uncertainties that sit around that, and people may not get the result that they want in terms of getting a property that gets a real big tick to say that the issues have been resolved.
Yeah. And internally, obviously, most of the problems are with GIB and what have you. You've had many cases where it sort of goes to the external part of the house.
So externals don't tend to get measured. Look, it can. We've heard of scenarios where there's been manufacture in a more of a rural setting, so manufacturing in an outbuilding. The fumes have then gone up, settle on the roof of the house. It's been tank water, so it's then come off the tank, it's been into then the plumbing system, and it's buggered up the whole plumbing system. So, it's a real mess. For every kilo of meth that's manufactured, there's 6 to 7 kilos of waste product. Now, that will typically go down the drains. If you're out in so we've seen drains that get dug up, and heard about drains that get dug up. If you're on a septic system, it can completely bugger up the septic system. I mean, meth chemicals being chucked down the tubes in main sewerage systems have completely blown out the biology at sewage farms. So she's not particularly good stuff.
Oh, great. No, definitely not. You one before you see where you had the one house was destroyed.
Yeah.
I guess, or decided to. What sort of decision did you, if you can say, did it come to where that decision was made?
So with that particular property, we just did the initial yes or no, is it there? And we got 4,200 micrograms of methamphetamine. It's just like, holy smokes, that's a pretty big number. And then you go through a whole range, massively over and above anything that we'd seen before. So you do go through questions when you get those outlier numbers like that. So have we done it right? Maybe we got it wrong. But when the detailed testing was done, it reconfirmed what we'd identified, and then the decision was that it's beyond economic repair. So often what people will find is if you've got more than a microgram of meth showing up on the surface, recommendation will be for the carpets to go and light fittings to be pulled out. Right. Those are places that attract proportionately more, and so then it becomes that balance of economics versus risk. And often you can spend lots and lots of money running around trying to test things, but is it worth it relative to the economic cost that's associated with it? So that's the challenge that we face. The other challenge that's associated with it is there's no particular standard that people are working to around the whole clean up piece. So that's a work in progress, and hopefully there's something that comes through on that soon. Right. I guess just to point on the what do you do from there once you've done the cleaning. Okay, so let's say a remediation action plan that was developed that said do these things. Yep. Once those things have been done, really, really important that people make sure that at that point they get a retest done.
Right.
Okay, because that's the bit of evidence that says once we've done everything, it was all fine. Okay, so the mistake that sometimes gets made is that gets done, and in a hurry, people stick the jib up on the walls and away they go. Now you've still got a whole bunch of uncertainty because you don't know whether it went in behind it.
Right. Understand. The idea of that still comes up positive.
Yes.
Yeah,
and so it's the uncertainty that sits there. A couple of things that again, investors can just sort of check on. So things that we've seen. I know that there's some work being done on paints and coatings that will reduce the ability of meth to get into a property. So that will make the whole clean-up side of things easier. It's just not there right now. What we have observed is that where you've got, for example, wallpapered property, and particularly vinyl wallpaper, that's had the paint put over the top of it, you've got a bit more of a barrier between the environment and the jib. Okay, and so often a resolution there is, let's remove the wallpaper and then test behind it. You find that actually the levels are far more manageable. The other thing is...
they finally have some use of wallpaper.
And the other thing is with air vents, so extractor fans out of bathrooms, range hoods, get those ducted outside. Okay, and again, what tends to happen is particularly with... the crackers have got hidden habits. They'll go into the toilet or into the bathroom. The lights get switched on. The extraction fan gets switched on, and then that sucks it up. Now, if that sucks it up into the roof space, and let's say there's manufactured or more significant meth-related behaviour going on in the kitchen, again, the extraction range hood goes on. If that goes up into the roof space, and you've got something like a DVS or an HRV system, you've just pushed that right the way through through the property. So little things like ducting, vents, etc. out of order. So just some basic things that landlords can do to try and reduce their risk exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, good point.
Well, as you said at the start, this is about sharing information that helps people avoid the risk. And these are some of the things that we've learned that, unfortunately, not too many people tell others about because they'd rather help try and clean stuff up.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, you sort of covered a bit of this, but you'll probably go a little bit more deeper. What standards exist around meth testing and the cleanup? What has to happen?
So, principally, there aren't any. All right? So, you could set yourself up as a meth testing company tomorrow.
Yep.
You could set yourself up as a cleanup company tomorrow. What we've got is some guidelines that were produced back in 2010. The focus being on meth labs.
Mm-hmm.
They've become the de facto benchmark for meth residues that are also associated with use.
Yep.
Okay, so that 0.5 microgram, remember it's relative to a specific area, but that 0.5 in 100 square centimetres, once it exceeds that, if the council get involved, they don't determine whether it's use or manufacture, they treat it as above guideline levels sorted out.
Yep.
As to how it gets sorted, as to how it gets tested, again, the guidelines have got some reference points in there around testing, but that testing is assuming that a problem is known and exists, and therefore it's about how you work your way through that process. I guess what we introduced to the market with the baseline field composite was something that had been used in the US for many years, but wasn't part of the guidelines. And it was, again, asking a different question. We look to have discipline and rigour around how we do what we do so we can at least create some level of relationship back to those Ministry of Health guidelines and give an indication.
Right.
But ultimately, if you want to know exactly what you're dealing with, you've got to use individual kits in individual areas, and that's where the costs kick in. As far as the cleanup is concerned, you've got more experienced operators out there who've created their systems. You've got people who've just been through a training program who've got their systems.
Yep.
I think at the end of the day, when I'm talking to people, it's like, how do I determine who to work with? Let's say in the meth testing space, don't just look at what the cost is.
Yep.
Okay. Have a conversation with, what do I get? And if it is positive, because the value in a meth test is not what it costs you, it's the support you get when it's positive. So if it is positive, what support am I going to get from you?
Yeah.
Okay, and it shouldn't just be a copy of the lab report and say, there you go, Mark, pick the eyes out of that, because there's a whole bunch of uncertainty that's created by that. In the cleanup space, again, engage with a number of operators who are out there, get a bit of a sense of what their experience is. If possible, talk to people who've worked with them in the past. It's kind of the best way of trying to get to the bottom of that. Again, don't just go for the cheapest quote on the cleaning side of things. As I say, that clean and retest, if you're not careful, that ends up becoming a real little money go round. Okay, and there's sort of reports of all sorts of interesting behaviour where the initial test is done down low. Typically, meth residue levels are higher the further up in the room you get. And then when the retest is done post-cleaning, people are testing up high. Oh, but you know what? The levels haven't produced as much because we thought we were cleaning this amount of meth, so we put this amount of elbow grease in, when actually we should put twice as much elbow grease into the mix.
Like shop around a little bit, find out people who've used them different companies before. And, that's all good.
Yeah, and look, no one entity out there is perfect. No one entity has got all the answers, but there are those people who've got a lot more experience. And so again, I think the value in a meth test in particular is, okay, if it comes back positive, what support am I going to get?
Oh, good.
But do there need to be standards? For sure.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. So as a landlord out there listening to this, they go, what can you do to protect your property? And I bet you can get the kits, not the kit sets, the devices you have around the house, which you'll talk about, obviously, but also what other things can landlords do as far as inspections and stuff? You've already mentioned about visiting and inspecting on rubbish day sort of thing, and have a wee nosy around there. So how can I protect my properties?
So some of the things, I guess, that are like at no cost, you can do real good background checking, or low cost at least. There's lots and lots of information out there about people. You whack somebody's name into Google, and you'll often be surprised with what comes up. You know, XYZ tenant who's got these glowing references that is actually, up before the beacon, charges for violent conduct, and this sort of thing. Do the credit checking and references. Check out social media, things like Facebook. They may have privacy settings on there, but there's ways in which you can dive in through the back door through their friends' connections who don't have privacy settings. Get a bit of a feel for who it is that you're dealing with. Right? So that's the sort of stuff that you can do before people get in. Once they're getting in, as I say, you can do some basics around just adjusting the way in which you're looking at the property. So having paint over wallpaper, like I say, seems to create a little bit more of a barrier. Minimising the amount of polyurethane and varnished and stained timbers, because those materials seem to hang on to meth more. Duct your vents from the exhausts on the extraction fans and rangewards to outsides. Keep good inspection reports. Obviously, the best thing before anybody moves in, you've got a baseline. And then you make that part of your marketing conversation when you're putting the property to market. You make it very clear that you will be testing as you see fit. There's a clause that goes into your tenancy agreement. And then another layer of deterrent on top of that again is to stick meth minder on the ceiling. It's looking for the chemicals associated with meth being manufactured rather than methamphetamine itself, although there have been properties where there's been indications that have actually ultimately been found to be associated with use rather than manufacture. But we certainly don't overstate what meth minder is capable of doing. Its principal purpose is to be part of the package of risk management that you put around a property that is all designed to deter the dodgy person and attract the quality tenant into that property, whatever state of the social strata that people live in. Because I firmly believe that most people are still decent people. There's a minority out there, and it's a significant minority that think that methamphetamine is a good idea, and they're creating way more chaos in our communities than they should do. But then we haven't really got a handle on that. And if you can improve the way in which you're managing a property so that you can give people choices, come here and get caught or go somewhere else, most people, not all, but most will go somewhere else.
Right. Just on the meth minder, basically, is that an asphyxiation after so long?
No, so meth miners are meth miners are a bit of globally unique Kiwi ingenuity. Right? So how that it came to being was meth lab in a holiday home in Wanaka. So there was a $35,000 uninsured loss. My mate knew the owner. There's something I can do about that. He's an engineer. Sunk a whole bunch of capital into developing this product. Everybody told it would be fantastic. That looks at the chemicals associated with meth being manufactured. So what you've got in this grey box is battery, 3 to 5 year design life on the battery, a cell phone. To all intents and purposes, so it works through the Vodafone network, electrochemical sensor, and then a bunch of tamper devices. Okay, we're not specific around what the tamper devices are because obviously you're not going to educate the crackers that are out there. What that does is communicate on a daily basis through the Vodafone network around air quality, battery and signal strength through the Vodafone network. At the time that we installed meth minder, we also set a baseline for meth residues in a property so that we can pick up the meth use side of things, and also then have that independent reference as to what meth minder may have been saying to us around the behaviour that's taking place within the property.
Okay, great stuff.
So for some people they want meth minder plus baseline meth testing. For other people, they're quite happy with baseline meth testing. For those who are quite happy carrying on doing what they've always done, my personal view on that is that you're waiting for meth to manage you at some point. And the advantages that you get from having the property that doesn't have the meth problem, unless you think you've got a real significant risk, are going to outweigh the costs that are associated with fixing up the issue. And if you do have a really significant risk, then leaving it isn't going to get any better. It's only going to make it worse because more people are going to be exposed, and then your risk exposure as a landlord is starting to increase.
Just on the prices of, I think we said it takes 2 to 5 days to get a meth test done.
Yes.
What's the cost of it? It's going to be standard, I guess, roughly.
So if you take the Auckland market, So typically a 5-day due diligence period.
Yeah.
So therefore you go for a 3 working day turnaround on a 3-bedroom property.
Yeah.
$269 plus GST. So it's about $310
Yeah.
in round numbers. If you've got a bit more time, so there's 5 and a 7 working day options.
Yeah.
So for example, on the 7 working day, $179 plus GST. 5 working day, $229
so
plus
a
GST.
shorter time. Okay.
Yeah. If you took that 7 working day option and had a larger property, so 2 kids, it wouldn't be twice $179. It goes up to $269 plus GST.
Okay. And what about MethMinder?
MethMinder, so set up an installation fee on that with the baseline meth test on install. Is $275 including, and then it's either $39.95 a month or $440 as an annualised payment when you come through the Meth Solutions channel. So you can get it direct from MethMinder, but it's a bit like going to the supermarket and the cellar door. Okay, you come through Meth Solutions, you get the better rates. But if you do go directly through MethMinder, then we won't jip you, and we'll make sure that you get the Meth Solutions rates around that side of things as well.
Punters getting a result they want from finding out before it happens and stop it happening in their property, their asset.
Really reducing the risk. So I mean, all up cost is just over $10 a week.
Yeah.
But as I say, we've got people in Whangarei getting $315 on a $300 a week property. Down at the Mount, you're getting $10 to $20 extra. The same in Hamilton. In Auckland, it's even more because you've got a more desirable property. So the irony is that people often say, well, the investment in this particular product is X. Well, the definition of an investment is that you're going to get a return on it. And what we are seeing is people are getting more income because then it's costing them to get the meth status.
Definitely, no property managers I've spoken to, they do get more for the clean houses than they do for the next one.
Sort of 2 to 3 years ago, so this whole sort of sense of when's meth testing coming of age. It's only relatively recently that people have really wrapped their heads around that. When I first started talking to people 4 years ago, you're talking out the back of your head. You don't know what's going on. Well, in the first 8 months of operations, we had as many tests booked in a day this week as we did in the first 8 months of operations when we started.
Right.
But the principle behind why we started Meth Solutions, the purpose of the business, and the understanding of what was going on out there hasn't changed. All we've got now is more evidence that supports the case for people taking positive action and steps to protect themselves.
And just a couple of questions I've sort of picked up on the way through. I'll just ask you ones. If you mentioned about the council before and not even to alert them, if the council, or in fact maybe first question is why would the council, at what stage would they have on their records that has been meth found in this place? So that's the first thing. And the follow on from that, if you can answer that one, is if you then get it totally cleaned and proof of that, can you get that also recorded on the council files?
So how does it get on there? Somebody has to tell them. Okay. So typically there's 2 routes to that happening. So one is the police get involved and they believe that manufactures occurred. Okay, but they have to believe that manufactures occurred, not just a use-related thing, and then they will tell the council.
Right.
So the second is that a disaffected party has a hold of a copy of a meth test report and gives it to the council. Okay, and then the numbers on that create sufficient concern on the part of the person from the council that they then slap a requisition on the property. So that's why, again, tenants can get tests done on property. So if you've got people who are moving into a property, they're getting sick, they're reporting sort of cold and flu-like symptoms, irritability amongst the kids. There's just one of those sorts of things where it's not going away, and they're talking to you about getting a meth test done. If you push them away, then you run the risk that they go and get the meth test done. Then they've got the report, and they can do whatever the hell they like with it. Okay, and similarly with a buyer situation. So, again, people may be reluctant to get a meth test before they go to market. They might want to take their chances. But if a buyer wants to get a meth test done, what I'd be saying is, happy to do that. Who do you want to use? Okay, and then I'd be getting that meth test done using the same company that they were proposing to use, but it will be in my name. And I'd be requiring that there be a non-disclosure around the results on that to third parties. Now, obviously, the agent has to notify people, back to your point, but as far as that person who's then and got the information, they don't have any fiduciary relationship with yourself necessarily, so there's nothing to stop them, shopping a report off to whoever they want to.
Right.
Again, that to me is just an extension of the harm that's associated with some idiot deciding methamphetamine was a good idea.
Yeah, no, that's right. And likewise, again, if you get it cleaned up, that property, you can then give council evidence that they've then got.
Yeah, so typically what they'll do is say, okay, you need to demonstrate what the issues are. All right, here are the issues, Mr. Councillor. Right now, you need to clean those up. You need to provide evidence that there isn't an issue. And again, that process isn't all super clear at the moment as well. So again, what you're getting on there is qualification. So some of the work that's going on out there at the moment around the standards space is also looking at what's the process that needs to be done around the remediation to get it to the point where the sign-off isn't just we've been provided with some evidence that it should be okay and it might be all right, but actually there's a much higher level of certainty that's created around there.
Right.
So, this standards work is bloody important.
Yeah, definitely. And just another question back to the house already, not only that, they wanted to get pulled down, is if a place is that bad and it's quite often manufactured out in the sheds and stuff, can the land or ground get contaminated?
Yes.
And if you want to rebuild on the site, what's the situation?
So you potentially then into soil testing to demonstrate the extent of the contamination. But you can be looking at physically removing 0.5 metre of dirt off the entire site. Oh. Now the irony of that for me is that the property that we know of that got physically removed was actually down in Flatbush, so in South Auckland, 6 to 7 year old brick and tile place, single level. Property was entirely gone. Mm-hmm. Top 500 mil of dirt gone up to the fence line. All right, and if you know Flatbush, you know that the property next door is not that far away.
Yep.
And so, again, to what extent was there testing done of adjacent properties? I'm not too sure. And that's the sort of stuff that needs to be sorted out, because you do get knock-on health effects when you're living in the vicinity of a meth lab.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah.
So, that's good. So you've obviously seen a few things. You've said about that property. What's the most surprise you've been or bizarre situation you've seen when testing a house? Have you got any good stories?
Yeah, I mean, that one was I think was the icing on the cake. We've been into a few properties where they are familial issues going on. So there's meth in the family, and the things that you see through that are pretty soul destroying. Mm-hmm. Properties that from the outside look fine, when you go inside, they're just an absolute bloody bomb site.
Right. Yeah.
And kids living in an environment where clearly there is a lack of care. I mean, I guess one of the most surprising things that I've seen is clothes and dirty clothes on a double garage floor about a bloody foot deep right the way across it. And methamphetamine was at the heart of it. So, probably one of the most challenging experiences that I've had is phoning up an older couple who bought their retirement home, and just before Christmas you phone up to tell them that they've got to move out, and no, you can't have your grandkids round to stay, and all because people just ignored all the warning signs. They were all there to be seen.
Yeah. But
it's whether or not we choose to look at them.
Right.
So there's that sort of stuff. That's a bit of an issue. I guess another one that was pretty good was a property that was up for sale by a sales specialist in the real estate game, a specialist and expert in selling investment property, and yet the fact that it had a rush paint job wasn't noted as being a risk factor, and therefore no advice provided through to prospective purchasers. Right. It took a first home buyer to join up the dots around the scenarios as far as meth risk is concerned. Right. Okay, and we tested that property 3 months prior, and there was 6 times as much meth on the walls. The difference was a coat of paint.
Wow.
So I think it's the fear that's associated with the issue that creates behaviours that people aren't thinking long term. And where this game is concerned, if you're going to be a real estate professional these days, you have to understand this risk, and you have to take steps to protect yourself, even if that means having a slightly difficult conversation with the owner of an investment property. And one of the things that we do is work with real estate agents and property managers to help them get systems and processes in place to reduce their risk exposure. Because at the end of the day, out of your best endeavours, just because you didn't really know, should you get into trouble? I don't think so. There's too many decent people get dealt to by this whole issue, and many of those work in the real estate industry.
Yeah. In fact, that's one we saw. I've sort of got to tell, I guess, and it probably comes down to it's not always. There's a couple of points, I suppose. One, it's not always the end of the deal if you do find some sort of method in there. But we had a property about a year and a half ago in Tauranga. It was a new build, and the owner actually, as a developer, he put some tenants in there for 3 months and then sold it. You might even know the property, I'm not sure. And in that time, I found I had a buyer come along, and towards me, I thought, geez, she wants a meth test. Why the heck's that?
Yeah.
She got a meth test done, and it did come to with minimal. I'm not sure if it was just above or below the 0.5. But she ended up, she did. So one, it was a heck of a shock to me and the landlord, or the developer. But also, what happened out of that was it was fairly low. She got it cleaned or whatever to a stage, and I think he dropped the price by whatever that was going to cost, 1,000, 2,000, or whatever it might have been. To make it happen. But yeah, we were involved with that one.
We were, yeah. And look, we've seen new builds even before completion contaminated with meth.
Yeah.
Because the crew that's been building them has been on the meth pump. So, we shouldn't make too many assumptions.
No.
And if you're buying a new home, make that one of your conditions of sign off. There is a lot of heat and emotion. I think I mentioned a little earlier, Matt, that you've got a situation where the emotional response to a positive meth test is not that different if it's a meth lab to if it's a little bit of meth that's associated with use. The health and safety effect of that is profoundly different. So one of the challenges that we've collectively got is that, for example, the banks haven't worked out strategy in this space. And that's something I think that, again, we're trying to work with the banks to help them get a strategy, because it exposes them to risk, it exposes their clients to risk, and part of that risk is missing out on commercial opportunity, because a little bit of meth in a property doesn't mean to say it's a profound health and safety risk, and therefore doesn't mean to say that it's not a good investment. What a little bit of meth at an indicative stage could mean is that there's a more significant issue. So that's where you engage with the vendor to look to get quantification of the extent that an indication is providing. What is the extent of the risk, to make sure that you're paying the right price for the property? Again, there's nothing wrong with selling a meth house. You've just got to disclose to the parties that there's a problem or a risk around the whole meth side of things, and then people will price in.
I'm sure the time to come when these regulations and whatever you do get done better, is people, it won't quite be as scary maybe as it is now for people to buy and clean or whatever they have to do to make it work.
So already, I think what we've got is people who worked their way through the system and got a great level of understanding. So, for example, we're talking to a lady who was looking at buying a property and ultimately bought a property down in Tauranga at auction, low levels of meth within it, done the research, got their heads wrapped around it. At auction, there's 3-4 people who are bidding for that property. So those are people who've kind of got their heads around it, worked out what's acceptable to them, and are making sort of informed decision around the investment side of things. The challenge for people who are heavily reliant on bank finance is that often the banks will turn around and say, if there's any meth in there at all, we're not lending. Therefore, the opportunity for people who are well resourced is to actually find properties that don't present a health and safety risk. The only way you know that for sure is to quantify it. So the indicative one is that, it's an indicative one. But to quantify that through that sale and purchase process, but it's the vendor that's spending the money doing that. You've still got a property that you can rent out without any risk from a landlord health and safety side of things. You just may not pay as much money for it.
Right.
And obviously the flip side of that is if you're the person selling their house, you may not get as much money for your property if you haven't managed the risk.
Yes, great stuff. Geez, it's good. It's gone for a bit over an hour, so you've had a fair bit of stuff today. So hey, that's been great coming today, Miles, and talking about this. I'm sure the listeners have learned a lot. Is there anything you want to sort of close up with before we finish it off?
Oh, look, I mean, again, thanks very much for the opportunity, Mark, to come and have the conversation. As I say, I think one of our taglines or words is know what you're buying and protect what you own, because these idiots who are involved with meth do not care about you, and they may come across as being great people, but they will do profound things to damage your property, given half a chance.
Right. Okay, great stuff. Thanks for your time, Miles.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, there you go. That's a lot to digest and to think about, and some good wee stories at the end of the conversation. So if obviously sort of very important part now of buying a property, and not everyone needs a meth test, not everyone gets a meth test. A lot of people do, and there's a good few reasons why you might want to, or even check your own place out, and even when you look at selling your place, what a great tool to have, getting the test done yourself before you sell it, so you can actually show your potential buyers. And also, and have been talking to some property managers recently, and that they certainly do get more rent when the place has been tested. So there's a good reason to go out and do your own place to start off with. That's it for this week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks and with another podcast, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that one coming up. That's to do with the protecting or setting up your structures to assist in what you're trying to do to protect your assets, like this one here was. So in the meantime, take care.